Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Nocturnity. Tonight we have some late-night drive horror stories for you that are sure to have you double-checking the power locks in your vehicle. That is, if you're brave enough to listen to these while actually in your car at night, and if so, you're braver than I. Believe me when I tell you that you're going to want to stick around until the end of this broadcast tonight. We always save the best for last, and tonight's is definitely no exception. As always, this broadcast is brought to you by cardanapparel.com. The link is in the description. Don't forget to give this video a like, and if you really want to help out, give it a share so we can continue to reach new ears. And if you haven't yet, take the second before we start to hit the subscribe button. It will be the best decision you make today. Now, let's waste no more time and dive without trepidation right into the realm of eternal night. Just a couple years ago, my bills were getting so high I felt like they would bury me. I already worked a full-time job, but these days, those don't even seem to cover your basic needs. So, to supplement my income, I insured my car to become an Uber driver. 3 nights during the week and both weekend days, I would spend a few hours picking up strangers and dropping them off where they needed to be. All in all, not a bad gig. I feared I would hate it, but the variety of personalities I'd come across every night was actually pretty entertaining. Weekday nights usually consisted of people going out for dinner and drinks, or coming home from the same. Weekends were packed with annoying people going out to the bar or club, or getting picked up from them, but still they were pretty entertaining most of the time. One night, though, was quite out of the ordinary, and the reason I stopped driving for Uber altogether. It was a very slow Tuesday night in November. Not many calls to be had as there was so much snow that most plans were being canceled. If you've ever been to Lincoln, Nebraska in the wintertime, during a snowstorm, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. As a result of this, I did something I don't normally do. I took a call for a person new to the service. I usually made a point of only taking people with good, extensive records on the Uber app, over 200 rides and an average of 4.5 stars and above. But, like I said, this was a slow night, and I was burning money rather than making it. So I took this call from a guy named Ashton with no history who wanted me to grab him from the Qdoba at Gateway Mall. When I pulled up, it was just past 10 p.m., the parking lot was practically empty, and there was only one person standing on the sidewalk in sight, so I figured it had to be him. Stopping beside him, I opened the passenger side window and called out, "You call an Uber?" over the whistling of snow flurries. The man leaned down and took a peek into the car at me. He looked to be in his late 20s or 30s, but it was hard to tell. He had a COVID mask over half his face and a baseball cap pulled tight down to his eyes, and all this within a big black hood with fur around the edges. I guess he didn't hear me because he asked if I was an Uber. I said yeah and unlocked the doors. Like most people do, he opened the back door and hopped in, covered in snow. "You must be Ashton," I said into the rear view. He looked confused and said, "Huh?" So I repeated myself a little louder, thinking he must not have heard me with the passenger window still open. "You must be Ashton." That time he heard me. "Oh, yeah, he confirmed. "Ashton, that's right. Sorry, bro, I couldn't hear you." "That's all right," I replied as I put the window back up. "Pretty bad out there, huh?" I was expecting him to say something back like, "Yes, thank you so much for picking me up in this storm at this time of night," because I knew I was probably the only driver willing to be out there. But instead he got right down to business. "I need to go to Morgan and West Benton." A little taken aback, I said okay and began to type it into my navigation system, as I didn't recognize Morgan Street. I'd heard of Benton, of course, but not West Benton. "Don't worry about all that," he told me as I typed. "It's easy, I'll tell you how to get there." I was basically done anyways, so I keyed in the last letters. "Ah, I see," I told him. Still in his hood, hat, and mask, he rolled his eyes and made an unamused clicking sound with his tongue. Whatever, I thought. Let's just get this guy home and out of my car. It was a good fare, after all. Usually that would be about a 20-minute ride, but in this weather, that time would double, which means it would double my pay. Clearly he was in a hurry, or at least had little patience, so I hit the accelerator and we were off. I tried to start up some conversations on the ride, but he just kept looking out the window into the night and brushing off my attempts. After a while, I gave up. I had to keep my eyes on the road anyways. Like I said earlier, there were flurries and it made it hard to see where I was driving at times. He did throw out a direction here and there, but other than that, I just threw on the music and did my best to focus on the road. Finally, I found West Benton. It was right along the top of a great big trailer complex called Highland Contempo. Mostly good people live in that place, but the area is also known to house some of the most dangerous people in Nebraska. It's somewhat notorious. I didn't want to judge a person by their neighborhood, but this guy's gruff demeanor was starting to add up. West Benton Street came to an end at Morgan Street, so I pulled over to the side and asked, "Any house in particular?" "Just keep going straight to that fence," he answered. "Okay, so I guess this will require a little explanation. I'll paint you a picture. So, at the end of Benton Street, you have to take a right onto Morgan. There's no left turn, just the backs of trailers. However, you can keep driving straight down a gravel path that goes about half a mile to a dead end, marked with a gate of wood beams painted with white and red stripes on them. The path had been plowed at some point during that day, you could tell, but snow had piled up since in the night, and I wasn't sure if my car would make it without getting stuck. I told him as much, and he quickly answered back, "This is a Tesla. You'll have no problem. Come on, I live past that gate, man. Don't make me walk the whole way in the snow." I gave a sigh, but let my empathy do the decision-making. "All right," I agreed. Hitting the accelerator, I took it slow down the path, surprised to not be spinning my tires. This guy really knew his Teslas. When we came to the gate, I stopped and turned back. "All right, here we are," I began. But before I could say any more, he was out the backside passenger door. What a prick, I thought to myself. The guy had no people skills. What's worse, he didn't even shut his door all the way. I tried calling out to him, but he was already on the other side of the gate and down the path a ways. "Damn it," I said to myself as I opened the door to get out. Trudging around the rear of the car in the snow, I got to the door and slammed it shut. This guy better have left me a good tip, I thought. My guess was his credit card would only be charged for the ride and he'd leave nothing more. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have the opportunity to check my phone to see. The second I closed the door, I noticed a group of men appearing out of the woodwork and surrounding my car. One of them hopped right into the driver's seat while I was still on the other side. "Hey," I yelled out, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" But before I could take a step in that direction, I felt a strong blow to the back of my head that knocked me to the ground. Before I knew it, I was getting beaten mercilessly from all directions. It was the most pain I've ever experienced, but that was nothing compared to the terror. I thought they were going to beat me to death. They then dragged me off the path and rifled through my pockets while I was half conscious. I'm sure they thought I was out, maybe even dead, and I'm sure they didn't care. I had nothing in my pockets, but as I lay there being covered with snow, unable to really move, I heard my car backing up and then disappearing into the distance. Inside it was my wallet and cell phone. I guess after all that, I should consider myself lucky that a woman from the trailer complex came out to let her dog go to the bathroom because she saw me and called an ambulance. If she hadn't have done so, there's no doubt I would have frozen to death out there. Back at the hospital, I learned I had a broken leg, hand, arm, shoulder, pelvis, and spleen, along with ribs cracked so bad that they nearly punctured my lungs. Needless to say, I was in bad condition. I couldn't identify any of the people who attacked me and stole my car either. I couldn't even identify Ashton because of his mask, hat, and jacket covering him up. Of course, as you may have guessed, his name wasn't even Ashton. He used a stolen credit card to open that Uber account just before I got the call. And credit cards are actually the key to all of this. You see, the people who stole my car and wallet began using my credit card, and that's how they were caught. Well, at least two of them. One being the one caught with the card, and the other being the guy who called himself Ashton. Turns out he was only planning on using the stolen credit card under that name for a free ride in the snow that night. But when he saw my car and wallet, he decided I was an easy mark in that weather and was texting his partners in crime from the back seat the whole way. My car was never recovered, though. Somewhere out there's a black market Tesla being driven around that used to be mine. I didn't even know that was possible, but it is. Having said all that, I guess you can see why I no longer drive for Uber. I'm sure my experience is very unique and extremely rare, but it shook me pretty badly. I'm happy to be alive, and thank that woman dearly for saving me, but I now live in fear every single day. This is a weight I'm going to carry for a long time. I spent my career as a traveling salesman, and through that profession, I've seen almost every nook and cranny of this country, and wouldn't change it for the world. But the most puzzling and life-changing thing I've ever seen happen right here inside my home state of New Hampshire. Well, after I'd retired, actually. My house is now, and was then, on the north end of Manchester. My sister, who's passed away, God rest her soul, lived with her husband in a beautiful house in the country, about an hour's drive from me in a little town called Lyndenborough. Though we weren't too far apart, the older we got, the less we would see of each other. Nevertheless, when Thanksgiving came around, the tradition in our family was to have a nice big dinner at her place with all the fixins. Well, a couple years back, I ended up staying at that dinner past late, and they offered for me to stay overnight, rather than make the drive all the way back to Manchester. But when you get to be an old guy like me, not only do you tend to be stubborn in general, but you definitely don't mess around with sleeping anywhere else but your own bed. So I said thank you kindly and got in my car for a midnight drive home. Like I said, I was a traveling salesman, so nighttime drives like this used to be a common occurrence in my life. By then I hadn't taken one in many years, so I looked forward to the prospect. I sensed the nostalgia I was about to experience and quite frankly jumped at the opportunity. Little did I know what lay ahead. If you've ever been to this state, you know it's beautiful country. A pleasant drive almost no matter where you are. I happened to still be somewhere near my sister's in Lyndenborough when it happened, driving along a typical New Hampshire country road with thick trees on both sides. There I was, singing along with my Dean Martin CD while I played drums on the top of my steering wheel, when suddenly an animal ran out from the left and stopped right in front of my vehicle. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest as I slammed the brake pedal to the floor mat, skidding along the pavement with no doubt I was about to clobber this thing to death with my front grille. Luckily, I stopped some distance from it, but not much. Regardless, that didn't do me any favors in the fright department. This thing was no animal I'd ever seen before. And though it stood on 2 feet and had 2 muscular arms at its sides, nor was it human by any measure. It was quite tall, maybe 8 feet, with a bald head of a very light, almost white shade. It had pointy ears like a gargoyle, and the eyes to match. They were squinted and sinister, with yellow irises against a white and bloodshot cornea. Its neck looked like that of an old bodybuilder's, extremely strong but aged, with all its veins protruding from underneath its pale skin. And it was bare-chested, and again, noticeably built. Big pectorals, ripped arms, and long fingers that led to claws, which it slowly moved open and closed and back again, as if ready to use them. And when I say bare, I mean it. There was no hair on its upper body to show for at all. It was bald to the waist. From there down, it was quite furry, I think. It was hard to tell because the hood of my SUV was obstructing my view. Whatever it was both hideous and majestic all the same. There it stood in the center of the road right in front of me, lit up by the beams of my headlights, staring me down with a look of spiteful fury on its face. Nothing but darkness surrounding it. I was basically hyperventilating from the shock of the near collision, though I remained motionless, as if entranced by its apoplectic gaze. We played that game of sizing one another up for a good 10 seconds. Then it hunched its shoulders and lowered its head, though its face never stopped facing me. Its expression grew even more menacing, causing my pulse to quicken even more. It was about to charge. I knew it, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. The fascination and fear combined to glue me in time and space. And it came forward at full speed. One leap, it was up on my hood, bending the metal beneath its feet as it ran across it in 2 hard bounds. I threw my arms up in front of my face to block the glass from cutting me to bits. Sure, it was going to come through the windshield at any second, but instead I then heard it above me on the roof. 2 hard steps banged on the ceiling, the last pushing the entire vehicle down like a button before springing back up to normal. I turned my head to the back, expecting to see it now behind me, but it never appeared. I breathed heavily as I frantically looked out each window again and again, but it was nowhere to be seen. I quickly realized it was either still on my roof or else it jumped into the sky and somehow never came back down. I dared not open my door to check, though. Instead, I took my foot off the brake and hit the gas like I was trying to break the pedal through the floor, peeling out down the road while expecting this thing to fall off the roof behind me. But nothing above me made a sound. So I drove like a nervous wreck until I saw the lights of a gas station about 5 minutes away from where it happened. Pulling in, I parked and took notice of the round mirrors pointing down along the pumps. There was nothing on my roof. The place was closed, but there was enough lights on for me to find the stones to finally open my door by then. I walked around my vehicle with jaw agape. They weren't footsteps hammered into my hood and roof. They were marks left by the biggest hooves I'd ever seen. It was all too much for me to handle. I couldn't help but to look around myself the entire minute or two I was outside of my SUV, convinced this thing was lurking in one of the bushes alongside of the road with plans to finish me off. I hopped back in my car and drove the rest of the way home in silence, a little paranoid, but less and less every mile I got further away. It's a story I've told countless times by now to people from around here. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Most people don't believe me. Some try to give me explanations for what animal it could have been, but they have no damned idea. I didn't glimpse at this thing. I studied it long enough to get a perfect picture of it if I ever described it to a police sketch artist. But of course, even seeing it drawn would send me into a mental state I don't want to psychologically visit ever again. The memory is haunting enough. My point being, I know what I saw well enough to know I don't know what I saw, if you catch my drift. When I was a teen, there wasn't much for me and my friends to do most of the time in our city than drive around and smoke weed at various places. My friend Derek and I would often go to the outskirts by the river where there was a bunch of long, dark, winding roads through dense trees with a big bag and a pipe, cranking music up and laughing our balls off while we smoked chronic and cigarettes. One of those nights, we were smoking out of this comically long pipe that we called the Gandalf, for obvious reasons, while Derek drove down one of those river roads, when we turned around a bend to see that just up ahead there were 2 police cars with their lights on, one on each edge of the road. In short, though it was a strange place for one, this was a roadblock, and we knew we were roasted. They were way too close for us to pull a U-turn and go the other way without them giving chase. Moreover, the pipe was lit. Putting it out wouldn't get rid of the clouds of smoke that would have to exit the windows when we opened them. They were close enough that when we stopped beside them, they were going to get lost in those clouds. So, Derek pulled up, completely ready to lose his license, while I lit a cigarette in the passenger seat. One of the cops on the side of the road waved us up and then signaled to stop. He came up to the window and recoiled from all the smoke flowing up into his face. It was like he'd just opened a barbecue. And instead of even mentioning it, he said, "How long have you been out here?" Derek said, "Well, what do you mean?" The officer clarified by asking, "Have you been by this road at all tonight before now?" We looked at each other confused for a sec. "No, we just got out here." "Have you seen any other cars?" he then asked. "No, sir." The officer stood up and looked over the top of the car to another officer who was standing on the other side of the road. I don't know what they said or signaled, but he came back down to the window and said, "Do yourself a favor and don't look into the ditch. You two have to leave here and not come back anywhere near this way again tonight. Is that understood?" Again, we swapped looks of mystification. "Yes, sir," Derek repeated. "Okay," the officer said, tapping the roof a couple times. "Go on and get out of here." He then stepped back and allowed us on our way. We couldn't believe our luck. But before we could begin to wonder how the hell we just got away with that, we looked out the driver's side window to the large ditch on the side of the road. Inside was a body of a man in a yellow jacket and a blue hat floating face down in the murky waters below. There was no question that he was as dead as a doornail. It was a pretty shocking thing to see, and of course, we were already in a heightened state of anxiety from the situation we'd just been through, and, let's not forget, we were stoned as hell. We slowly went by it, really taking it in. I can say that seeing that man laying in a ditch changed something in me at that moment that I can't really put my finger on. Maybe a loss of some kind of innocence, I don't know, but it had a very strange and deep effect on me, on us both, I'm sure. I never found out who he was, how he died, or how he ended up there. Poor bastard. I hope he's in a better place now. I grew up in a family of criminals, so it's no surprise that I ended up being one as well. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I was one of the most notorious car boosters on the West Coast. I made so much money it was hard to find a place to keep it. Think about it this way. I could jack a Mercedes and have it at a chop shop within 45 minutes, sometimes much quicker, collect $5,000 for it, and be out on the road to grab something else to bring it back within the hour. I started that trade as a teen, taught by my father, and I did it every night, all night, for many, many years. An average night was between 5 and 10 cars. That's upwards of 50 large a night sometimes. Some weeks I'd be pulling in over $250,000. Like I said, more money than I knew where to keep it. I wasn't a drinker, I wasn't really a spender, I didn't like flashy things. I kept to my own. The cash just kept stacking. Shit changed one night, though. Something happened that would start the dominoes falling so hard I had to leave the country and never return. The way it worked was like this. During the day, I'd drive around for a few hours and pick out my target vehicles for the night. And when night rolled around, I had my driver pick me up at home, let's call him Louie, and he'd take me to my first target and drop me a ways away. He'd keep 6 with a walkie while I did my magic. When the car was started, I'd drive to the nearest chop shop, collect my money, give Louie a couple $100, and hop back into his car and go to the next target. So anyways, one day, I'm driving around and noting where I'd be that night when I spot an understated gem, a new Nissan 300 ZXR. No, not the flashiest car in the world, but worth a lot to chop shops at the time, and one of the easiest cars to grab out there. I knew the neighborhood well, and knew it wasn't from around here. This neighborhood, let's just say, didn't house a lot of people who could afford a new car like that. So I figured if we come back tonight and it's still there, it's mine, because I knew there was a good chance it wouldn't be there the next day. Well, as it turned out, it was still there that night. I'd moved 3 cars by then, my duffel and Louie's ride was already bursting at the seams with bills, and my pockets were stuffed with upwards of about $500 when he dropped me down the block from it. I walked up, picked the lock without tripping the alarm, hopped inside, and started it up in about 25 seconds, smooth as silk, and off I went. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, wouldn't you know it, 10 blocks down the road at a red light, 3 lowriders come out of nowhere and surround me, blocking me from moving, and a shitload of bandana-wearing thugs jump out pointing guns at me. I'm thinking, shit, I jacked the wrong dudes. They start yelling in my face to give them all my money, which I do, while another shoves a gun right against my cheek and demands I pop the trunk. I do my best to find the lever while he's screaming at me, thinking he's about to blast half my face off, and eventually I pull it. Within a few seconds, they're back in their cars, and I'm left sitting there all alone with my heart pumping like a 15-inch subwoofer. So yeah, they got away with about $500, but I still had the car. So I figured, all's well that ends well. They must not have been the owners. I must have randomly boosted a car and then ran right into a robbery. The two were unrelated. So I began to move when the light turned green. That's how quick it happened, noticing then that the trunk was left open. I pulled over to get out and close it when Louie came around the corner. He pulled over behind me and I quickly told him I'd explain after we moved the car. We went to the chop shop, I got a good 10 grand for it, and me and Louie pulled away. I was so shook up from what happened I decided to call it a night right then and there. Besides, I'd already made around 20 grand by that point, so all in all, a good shift. I told Louie what happened over some burgers after that. He couldn't believe they didn't take the car. We figured they weren't car thieves, though, and didn't know the street value, which was obviously the case. Petty thugs in that area would have seen the make and model and figured I was an out-of-towner with some thick pockets, strictly robbed me for my cash. Whatever, I made a killing. Like I said, all's well that ends well. Fast forward a couple days, and I get a page from a number that looks familiar, but I can't pinpoint it. So I call it, and it turns out to be, let's call him Tommy, from the shop I sold that car to. He isn't happy. He tells me to come to the garage right away. I show up, and Tommy's banged up pretty bad. Before I can even ask what happened, his goons ambush me and start laying a beating on me. With my head and body throbbing, they wrap chains around my shoulders and hit the switch to a power hoist that lifts me up like a piñata in front of them all. Tommy tells me some big-time heavies showed up to his shop earlier and took the car that I'd sold to him the other night right after beating him half to death with brass knuckles. They accused him of stealing a package that was in the trunk and said if they didn't get it by that night, they were going to kill him and everyone in his whole family. These guys were outfit boys, and they were not playing around. They were going to do what they said they were going to do. If he didn't have the package, which turned out to have been heroin, he needed to pay for it. $8 million. Holy shit is right. I had a lot of money, but not that much. I told Tommy I didn't have the package. His goons thought a little more violence would refresh my memory of where I put it. They started throwing wrenches and tools at me as I hung there defenseless. I thought that alone was going to kill me. I did my best to holler out the story of the robbery at the light, but the goons wouldn't let up. Luckily, Tommy knew me well enough. In fact, he knew my father, and therefore knew damn well we were honest people when it came to shit like this. We were car thieves, not drug dealers. In the end, he took pity and let me down, believing my story. I didn't know what to do at first. No way I was coming up with that much scratch by that night, so I did what I thought was right and went to see the boss that had his people rough up Tommy. We'll call this guy Carlos. Maybe I could tell him what happened and he'd show me some mercy. Maybe not, but I was sure I could work something out. I was in rough shape. Black eyes, bruised face and body, limping and coughing. Those guys did a good job on me. I was scared Carlos's boys were going to finish what Tommy's boys had started. But Carlos was surprisingly accommodating. I was led into his front gates and shown right to his office that was situated in the biggest mansion I'd ever laid my eyes on. He had them bring me a drink and sat down and watched as I told him my story. After I was done, he told me I was brave for showing up to do this and loyal to take responsibility away from Tommy in the situation. But, he said, you're also very stupid, because you've stolen from me and now you're going to have to pay for it. I told him that I could work out a plan and pay him back over time, that this was all just a big mistake, that I didn't know the car had anything in it. He disagreed at first, saying that the car had been loaded just a few minutes before I took it, and figured I had to have been watching it to have timed it so well. But I respectfully disagreed, telling him I wouldn't know what to do with this product even if I had it, that I boosted cars for a living, nothing else, that this was all a terrible coincidence. He looked at me in silence for a minute. I believe you, he said, to my brief relief. He then paused and said, come here, let me show you something. He brought me into a room that would have been a beautiful sitting space if it hadn't been for the man standing in the middle of it with a wire strung from each side of the room around his neck and a sock stuffed in his mouth. I recoiled back but was shoved forward by one of Carlos's guards, forcing me to look. I almost fainted at the sight. The man's eyes gave a look I can't put into words. The fear, the defeat, the pain, the terror. It was disgusting. You see this man? Carlos asked me calmly. I nodded. This man stole from me, he continued. Each end of that wire is hooked up to a crank that cinches a little tighter every hour. It'll take around 2 days for it to kill him. And make no mistake, it will kill him. But first he will experience agony like he never imagined, fear like he never knew he could experience, and pain he thought couldn't be possibly inflicted on a human. It will cut his neck and throat slowly, and it will never let up, only get worse, very, very slowly, and eventually it will sever his head. But before it does, we will tend to the bleeding. We will prolong his life for as long as we can, only to make sure he suffers for as long as he can. I was shaking at this point. Carlos turned to me very matter-of-factly. I've heard of you, he told me to my shock. I once considered you working for my outfit, just as your father had time to time when we were both young men. But you stole from me, and if you don't repay what you've taken by 11 o'clock tonight, what you see happening to this man will be what you wish for compared to what you will get. If you try to run, we will find you. And while we look, every person you care about will be tortured to death and told you're the reason it's happening. You have till 11. With that, he left me standing there dumbstruck. Eventually, one of his men grabbed my arm and showed me to the door. If you think you've been stressed out, think of how I was feeling at that moment. I inadvertently threw up all over Carlos's flowers in the front. I had to get that package back. But how? The first idea I had was to locate the guys who robbed me. So I jumped into my car and drove around that neighborhood looking desperately for those cars. Luckily, I knew cars and could pick them out the second I saw them again. If I saw them again. They were all Chevy Impalas, 2 of them 62s and 1 was a 64. All of them dark blue with an overcoat of sparkling. Ugly in my opinion, but that's besides the point. I drove around that area for hours with no luck, checking the clock almost every minute and having a panic attack every time it moved forward. And then, I saw one of them. It was like being thrown a small lifeline. It was in the parking lot of a burger stand. No one was in it, though. Happening to glance over my shoulder at that moment, I noticed a black sedan a little ways down the road with a guy in shades staring at me from his driver's seat. He was sitting beside another guy with shades that was definitely looking right at me. Carlos has someone tailing me, I thought to myself, making sure I don't run. Just then, a couple guys came around from the other side of the burger stand and hopped into the Impala. I waited until they pulled out to start my car up. Staying a ways back, I tailed them back into a neighborhood those of us from LA know well enough to stay the hell out of. I watched what house they pulled into and took note, and also took note of the black sedan that tailed me the whole way. There in the driveway were the other two Impalas. Got ya, I said to myself as I came to a stop down the road from the house. Looking to my right, I saw a group of what looked to be neighborhood gang members posted on a porch of the house I was in front of. They were looking at me like wolves looking intruders into their territory. It was time for me to split. Minutes later, I was back on the highway plotting what my next move would be. God knows I couldn't just walk up, knock on the door, and ask for the package back. This was clearly a trap house. I knew enough to know that. I'd be dead before I got inside the front yard. Checking my rear view, I saw the black sedan again. It made me nervous, but it gave me an idea. I put the pedal to the metal and flew back out to Carlos's place to speak with him again. He was surprised to hear that I came back and let me in through the gates. Once inside, I was led to another room in his palace where he was sitting in front of a little tree with a pair of scissors. He didn't look up at me, but he began to talk to me all the same. It's called bonsai. You sculpt this little tiny tree to perfection by cutting off the dead weight one piece at a time. Have you heard of it? Yeah, I answered. Karate Kid. Carlos's eyes wandered up to look at me. He sighed as if I was an uncultured swine, as if he wasn't the one with a guy being tortured to death 2 doors down. He then looked back at the bonsai. You have my package? He asked. I don't, I admitted, but I know where it is. Carlos continued pruning. Then why are you here? Because the guys who robbed me and took it are armed and dangerous, I explained. They'd kill me if I tried to get it back. And where is it? I told him the address and let him know the situation. Well then, he said, I guess you're in a tough spot. Because if I have to get it back, that will mean you have failed to. And if you fail to, it'll be impossible for me to cancel your debt. But I'm telling you where it is, I pleaded. I didn't give it to them. They stole it from me. I didn't even... Shh, Carlos interrupted calmly, still not taking his attention off his bonsai tree. If a man steals something and it ends up in a pawn shop, and the original owner sees it there and gets it back, does that cancel the crime of the man who stole it? I thought about the question. No, but that's not... Again, he interrupted me. No is right. Whether you meant to or not, you stole a package from me worth more money than this entire house and the property it sits on. So the choice here for you is a simple one. Either you get the package back and clear your debt, right your wrong, cancel your crime, or I get it back and you pay the piper. My people will be there to get the package at 11:01 tonight. Let's hope for your sake, the sake of those who love you, and the sake of those you love, that it's here before that. He looked at his watch. It's 7 o'clock now. That gives you 4 more hours. I tried to get a word in, but he interrupted again and just said, Goodbye. At that, one of his guards grabbed my arm and started directing me out of the room. I was livid. Out of brashness, I muttered, Well, I guess whoever you have following me will get a front row seat to those guys killing me, so you won't have to. Stop! I heard from behind me. I turned around, and for the first time in that visit, I had Carlos's full attention. Who's following you? I told him point blank. The guys in the black sedan. I have no one following you in a black sedan, he told me frankly. That confused me. He looked serious. But before I could question any further, he repeated his order for me to leave with a nod of his chin, and his guard once again manhandled me, this time right out the door. Back in my car, I punched my steering wheel as I drove down towards LA County. Shit, I screamed to myself. What the fuck am I gonna do? I was at a loss. There was nothing I could do. There was no way in hell I was gonna be able to muscle that package back from those gangbangers. I had to face it. I was dead meat. My rage was about to burst when I saw the black sedan a few cars back from me again. I pulled off the highway suddenly at the next exit and watched behind me, and yep, they followed. So I pulled over into the next parking lot I saw and waited for them to pull over on the road. Getting out of my car, I marched right over to them. Who the fuck are you? I demanded when I was a few steps away. Just like earlier, there were 2 men in black aviator shades in the front seats that traded looks at each other. The one on the driver's side looked at me and said, The better question is, why are you, a petty car thief, going back and forth to one of the most notorious drug lords in America's house? I knew right away. "You're feds." They grinned at each other. "Stay the fuck away from me," I told them, and turned around and went back to my car. As I walked, I heard them chuckling to one another. "We'll catch you slipping at some point," one of them said. I started up my car and pulled out of the parking lot. They, of course, followed, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I've been outrunning the law in cars since I was 14 years old. "Let's see if you can handle this," I said to myself as I got onto the on-ramp. They were a few cars back when I hit the gas and started weaving in and out of lanes. They did well to keep up, but then I unexpectedly jammed on the brakes and drifted a 180-degree turn through the brake and the dividers, seamlessly switching to the other side of the highway and going in the opposite direction. They didn't stand a chance, and slammed on the brakes too late to make the turn. In my rear view, I saw car after car rear-ending each other behind them. It wouldn't be a problem for me anymore, at least not for a while. It was around that time that the sun began to go down over Los Angeles. Usually at this time I'd be eating and getting ready to meet up with Louie to get a night's work in. Not tonight. Here I was pulling into that same neighborhood as earlier, without a hope in my mind. I sat there for a while in that hopelessness, humming and hawing as the skies turned dark and the clock on the dash trudged forward, every second increasing my overwhelming feeling of dread. Now and then I'd see a cracked-out addict stagger up to that house and go inside for a few seconds before coming back out and disappearing into the night, their pockets obviously holding a fix. For a second I considered pretending to be a customer, but decided I couldn't just walk up to the door. One of them was bound to recognize me from the night before. But I had to make a move soon. My rationale was this. If I tried to get that package back, I would probably get killed in the process. But if I didn't, I'd definitely end up dead, and that would be the most painful death I could imagine. So, there was really only one choice to make as I saw it. Get it back or die trying. Despite not knowing exactly what I was looking for, I did have one optimistic thought affording me a glimmer of confidence at that moment, though. I was a professional thief. I had a talent of moving unseen through the night and getting away with taking what I wanted without confrontation. With any luck at all, I could do the same here. Yes, the odds were against me, but there was at least a morsel of hope, even if it was the hope of a fool. Grabbing my toque from the back seat, I pulled it down to my eyes and slid silently out of the car into the cover of darkness. The closer I got to that house, the more I heard loud voices inside of it talking over a thumping stereo. The smell of weed got stronger and stronger as I approached. The next-door neighbor's was dark, so I slinked into their yard and crept around into the backyard. I moved like a shadow to the fence and peered over. The backyard of the trap house looked clear. Everyone was inside, so I quietly began to hop over the fence, but froze suddenly in an all-out panic. There, lying by the back door of the house, were two pit bulls. They looked like two heaps of muscle with eyes cut out of it. I did my best to silently go back down and luckily remained unseen or heard by them. Shit, I thought to myself. This was going to make things difficult. But I had to keep going. I'd crept around dogs before and was going to have to do it again. Not pit bulls, but so it goes. I moved down the fence to a point where if I hopped over without being heard, I'd be right by a side window where the dogs wouldn't be able to see me unless they walked over there. I was shitting bricks as I went for it. Suddenly I found myself in that yard. I'd bet my heartbeat was louder than my breathing, which I kept to a minimum. The window was a crack open, and inside the chatter continued as I slid it all the way open and climbed inside the house. My head was spinning. I was now in a bedroom. There was an automatic weapon laying on a bed with a clip already loaded into it. I thought of grabbing it, but was cut off from all thoughts of that kind as I heard someone talking, and it was getting louder. He was coming right for me. I frantically looked back and forth, and for a second almost dropped and rolled under the bed, but quickly went into the closet instead at the very last second. I just made it inside and closed the door to a crack as the bedroom door burst open. A thugged-out tattooed gangster entered. He was a behemoth. In my mind, he was going to go right to the closet and open it to find me within a couple seconds and then execute me with his bare hands. It took all my strength not to start hyperventilating. Instead, I watched him go to the other side of the room and grab something off a shelf while another set of giant footsteps boomed on the floor outside the door. Now I was waiting for him to notice the open window behind the drapes that he was standing right beside, but instead he turned towards the bedroom door and said, "I got the number right here," holding up a scrap of paper he'd picked up from the shelf. I heard another voice in the doorway say, "Give that motherfucker a call then. Shit's gotta be worth at least $1 million." My ears perked up. "Shit, more than that," the first one answered. "You're gonna need 3 motherfuckers and a crane to get it out the trunk." "The trunk," I repeated in my head. They laughed and left the room. I let out a huge gasp and realized I'd basically been holding my breath in there the whole time. My panic then kind of morphed into excitement. Something they figured was worth over $1 million was in the trunk. I had a pretty good feeling I knew what it was. Pushing the closet door, I made my way towards the window. "Hold up, I'll get it," I heard from behind me as the bedroom door burst back open. Thank God I was already out in the nick of time. I put my back against the house right under the window. I heard rustling in the bedroom and waited until it died down to hit the fence. But as I did, I heard growling and the scraping of claws on pavement. The pitties were coming at me at full speed. I flew over into the next yard and hit the deck as they started barking like it was feeding time. Fuck, I thought to myself as I laid against the other side of the fence. The dogs only separated from tearing me to shreds by a few pieces of plywood. I then heard the behemoth rip the drapes open in the window I'd just jumped out of. To my left, I also heard a few kids walking down the sidewalk in the front, laughing to each other about something. I'm guessing the behemoth in the window must have saw them too, because he told the dogs to shut the fuck up and go lay down. They obediently listened. Thank God. I waited a few minutes in silence and then made my next move, tearing out of that yard and making my way back to my car. Getting inside, I threw off the toque and wiped the sweat off my brow, breathing normally for the first time in like 10 minutes. Time was running out. "In the trunk," I said to myself out loud. I looked down the road at their driveway. 3 cars. Which one, I then asked myself. It would be impossible for me to hang around in that front yard long enough to pry open 3 trunks. But it didn't take much thought to come up with an idea. Firing up my engine, I hit the gas and went to find a payphone, and did so within a couple minutes at a Sunoco, where I called 2 associates. I explained the plan I had to them, and they met me there within 30 minutes, just before 9 p.m. By 9:15, we were all creeping down the street towards the trap house with our tools in our hands. I don't need to re-mention that I'm a professional, but I'll let you know that so were these 2. We were in those 3 Impalas within 15 seconds, but the roar of those engines and the automatic headlights nearly ruined everything. Before we were backed out of the driveway, the front door of the house was open and over 20 guys were running out at us, guns pulled. We peeled down the street, ducking in the driver's seats as bullets flew through the windows. But we got away. Those guys couldn't have caught us if they had a NASCAR to chase us in. We knew what the fuck we were doing by this point. My adrenaline at this point, by the way, was surging through me like I'd injected a dozen B-12 shots in one go. The other 2 followed me out of town, and we eventually pulled into an open lot. "Just stay in the car and pop the trunks," I told them. Walking around to the backs of the cars, I almost buckled at the knees when I saw it. Inside mine was a pallet full of reflector bags stacked on top of each other and held down with black straps. This was it. I couldn't believe it. I'd pulled it off. I'm not gonna lie, I almost started crying right then and there. I told the guys to bring their cars into Tommy's, that these were customs and the parts alone would get them over 6 racks each, and I sent them on their way. After that, I closed my trunk, got in the driver's seat, and started my ride back to Carlos's, my life and his package secured in the trunk. And I wish I could tell you that that was my happy ending, but unfortunately I can't. As dumb luck would have it, at a red light, I turned to the car beside me and guess who was there? Those same 2 damn feds that I'd lost earlier. When they realized it was me, they almost jumped out of their window and into mine. I tried to hit the gas and escape, but they were on top of things this time. They zoomed in front of me and boxed me in between them and the car behind me. Within a second, they were out of their car with their guns pointed at my head and yelling to get my hands up. This was it. I was that close to solving all my problems, but now I was sunk. Just before 11 o'clock, I was pulling into the gates at Carlos's in the Impala. They let me in, and Carlos came out to greet me in the driveway, giving me a slow clap as I parked the car. "If you're here in this hideous thing, I'm guessing you have my package," he said as I got out. I walked around to the trunk and opened it up. We all stood there and looked inside. "I'm impressed," he said honestly. I didn't care. I looked him in the eyes and asked, "You have your package. It's before 11. Am I free to go?" He looked at me and actually took time to think about it, the asshole, and finally said, "Go." I turned around and walked towards the front gates. ripping the wire off my chest from under my shirt just as more than 24 black SUVs and sedans flew by me on either side, and a spotlight from a helicopter blazed into Carlos's yard. That much product was enough to put him away for the rest of his life. That's not to mention the guy that the feds found being strangled with a wire inside the house. I saved that poor son of a bitch's life without even being motivated to. Carlos is still in maximum security as we speak. I had to testify at his trial, and afterwards, I had to say goodbye to my life altogether. They moved me into witness protection, relocated me out of the country, with none of the money I'd saved over all my years of hard work. I'm sure Carlos has his men working full-time to find me, so I live always looking over my shoulder, but it is what it is. The feds got me a job in a mechanic's shop out here at $18 an hour, but I didn't keep it for long. You know why? Because no matter where I am, there's always going to be cars, nighttime, and chop shops. Well, my friends, that's the end of this one. I hope you've enjoyed your trip into Nocturnity once again. If so, be a friend and leave a like, and if you want to go the extra mile, share this broadcast to wherever it can be shared so we can reach new ears. We'd greatly appreciate the assistance. If you haven't subscribed yet, do so now by simply clicking the button, and you'll be sure to be the first to know about all our future episodes and specials. As always, this video has been brought to you by CardanApparel.com. Shopping with Cardan will not only have you looking fantastic, but you'll be supporting this channel in the process. Nocturnity Zone shirts and hoodies are on their way, as are new horror stories, but if you haven't had your fill just yet, go to our channel to keep the vibe going. There are dozens of others just waiting for you to listen to them. As for me, I have to drift off into the night and find you more tales for next time. Until then, my friends, stay safe.